Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for being here today. I've got a new story to share. So let's dive in. My name is Patrick and I did something most people would never imagine. I left my marriage in the middle of the night, while my wife was still asleep. I didn't leave a note or explanation, just quietly slipped away. I know that sounds heartless, but trust me, it wasn't a decision I made lightly. It took years of struggle, holding on, hoping, and trying before I finally let go. The relationship had become unrecognizable. It used to be filled with love, shared dreams and memories, but all of that eventually faded under the weight of constant tension and arguments. And so one day I just disappeared. What I didn't see coming was what unfolded years after that. Let me take you back to how it all began. For a long time I truly believed I had it all figured out. From the moment I met Angelina, everything just clicked. We weren't flawless, but our love felt real, deep and certain. So when we decided to get married, I didn't hesitate. I was all in. But nothing prepares you for how marriage can test your spirit. Shortly after we tied the knot, life threw us a curveball. Angelina became pregnant, and it was one of the happiest moments of our lives. But the joy was short-lived. One afternoon while I was at work, I got a call that shattered me. Angelina had suffered a miscarriage. It wasn't just the loss of our child. It was a medical emergency that nearly claimed her life. She collapsed at home and was found unconscious on the kitchen floor by a friend. She had lost a lot of blood and didn't even have her phone nearby to call for help. When she came back from the hospital, she wasn't the same. She didn't scream or blame me, but something in her had changed. Her eyes looked hollow and her warmth was gone. She withdrew, became distant. Even the smallest gestures, like offering her coffee, would provoke irritation. I told myself it was grief, that she just needed time to heal. But time didn't help. If anything, things only grew worse. She stopped smiling. Everything I did seemed to annoy her. If I got home a little late, she'd accuse me of not caring. If I missed a chore, it became an attack on my entire character. Her words became weapons, and every conversation turned into a battleground. I tried to reach her, to understand, to talk through what she was feeling. But she shut me down every time. I stayed for as long as I could, reminding myself that love means patience, that she was grieving and maybe this was just temporary. But love has its limits. Patience wears thin when you're being chipped away day by day. Eventually I started talking back. I didn't want to, but I couldn't just stay silent anymore. The arguments became louder. The silence in between became heavier. We stopped sharing a bed, stopped speaking for days. I started to wonder if she even wanted me around anymore. I felt like a stranger in my own home. The person I had fallen in love with had become someone I didn't recognize. I kept going back in my mind to that tragic day we lost the baby. That was the moment everything started unraveling. I don't believe she wanted to hurt me. She was in pain herself and didn't know how to cope. But I was in pain too, and I was drowning just as much as she was. At one point, the distance between us felt so vast that I began to suspect she might be seeing someone else. It wasn't just frustration in her anymore. It felt like disconnection. Her heart seemed elsewhere. I hated myself for thinking it, but the doubt ate away at me. I started checking her phone, going through her messages and social media when she wasn't around. I even tracked her movements a few times. But the truth? I found nothing. No evidence of betrayal. Just anger. And I was the closest thing she had to unleash it on. Knowing she wasn't cheating didn't bring comfort. It just made it worse, because it meant this was really who she had become. One night, after another explosive fight, I suggested therapy. I told her we might need help, that maybe a professional could guide us through the mess. She dismissed it instantly, called it weak. She didn't want help. She didn't want anything to change. And that's when I realized I was the only one fighting for us. After that, I started staying out late. Not because I was having fun, but because I didn't want to go home. I drank more than usual, just enough to blur the edges of everything I was feeling. But no matter how late I returned, she always had something to say. Something cutting. Something cruel. It didn't matter if I was polite or silent, she would find a reason to start again. The final blow came when I lost my job during a round of layoffs. Already emotionally exhausted, this pushed me over the edge. I was stuck at home all day and things only got worse. Angelina didn't even try to hide her contempt. Every morning was a new insult. Every night a new fight. One day she looked at me and said, A man without a job has no say. That was it. One morning while she was still sleeping, I quietly packed a small bag, just essentials. A few clothes, my laptop, ID, and documents. I stood there for a second, wondering if I should write something. A note, a message, anything. But I knew if I gave myself time to think, I wouldn't leave. So I didn't. I walked out. I went to the bank, withdrew everything I had. Not much, but enough. Then I bought a new phone, logged out of everything, and smashed my old one. I didn't want to be found. Not by friends. Not by family. Not by her. Later that day, I found a small cabin listed on Airbnb. Deep in the woods, remote, cheap, and quiet. I booked it and left the city that same afternoon. That night, I lay in a strange bed, surrounded by silence and trees. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. Real peace. In that cabin, I started over. I focused on skills I had ignored: writing, editing, freelancing. I created profiles online, began taking small jobs, slowly building a life that belonged to me. One step at a time, I started rebuilding not just a career but myself. And that is how I walked away from everything. Not because I stopped loving her, but because I had to start loving myself. It all began with some simple graphic design work. Nothing glamorous, but enough to keep me afloat. Slowly, the jobs started coming in. I wasn't earning a lot, just enough for groceries, rent, and the bare essentials. It wasn't much, but for the first time in a long while, I could finally exhale. A few months passed, and I made a decision that even surprised me. I bought a small plot of land not too far from where I had been living. It was tucked deep in the woods, quiet and inexpensive. But most importantly, it was mine. I didn't need luxury, just peace. So I hired a local guy to help me build a modest little cottage, 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a porch where I could sit and listen to the wind move through the trees. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I completely let go of the life I once knew. I distanced myself from everything that reminded me of Angelina. But on the rare, still nights when the world seemed to hold its breath, thoughts of her would sneak in. I'd wonder if she had found someone else, if someone else now held her hand, made her smile. Or maybe she was just glad I was gone. Those thoughts didn't haunt me, but they lingered. More than a year later, something changed in me. Maybe it was the quiet, or maybe just curiosity, but I decided to reach out. I called my family. As soon as they heard my voice, I could feel the shock through the phone. My mother broke down in tears. My sister couldn't stop asking if I was okay. My younger brother just kept repeating, "Where the hell have you been?" They were relieved. They had feared the worst. Said they thought I had disappeared for good. And in the middle of all the emotion, they told me something I hadn't expected. Angelina had been searching for me. Relentlessly. She had called every friend, contacted extended family, even hired professionals to track me down. She refused to give up. I didn't know how to process that. I reassured them that I was safe and doing fine. We talked a while longer and then hung up. That call didn't flip my world upside down, but it planted a thought, one I couldn't ignore. Weeks went by. I was still living quietly in the woods. Then one morning I heard a knock at the door. Out there, that kind of thing was rare. Nobody just shows up. I cautiously walked over and opened it. And there she was. Angelina. She looked exhausted. Her clothes were wrinkled from travel, and for a moment she just stared at me, like she was unsure if I'd slam the door in her face. Later, she told me that when one of my cousins accidentally mentioned I had called, she used the last of her savings to hire someone to find me. I didn't think she'd ever go that far. But she did. She didn't come to argue. She didn't yell. She just asked for a chance to talk. I stepped aside. We sat in silence at first, unsure of how to even begin. Then she started to speak, and she apologized. Again and again. She told me how broken she had felt after the miscarriage. How she had begun to blame me for not being there, even though I had only been at work. She admitted she never realized how much damage she was causing until I was gone. She said she unloaded all her pain onto me because I was the only one close enough to take it, and that it wasn't fair. She told me she finally went to therapy, after months of struggling. Talking to someone helped her see how she had buried her resentment, let it grow, and turned it into something destructive. She cried, saying she regretted every time she shut me out, ignored my efforts, rejected therapy, and turned our home into something cold and painful. When she paused, I told her the truth. I didn't leave because I stopped loving her. I left because I couldn't recognize myself anymore. The constant blame, the way everything became my fault, the yelling, it wore me down. I told her how I started drinking to find peace, how I stayed out just to avoid coming home. I told her how being out in the woods alone was the first time I'd felt whole in years. She listened, tears still on her face. She told me she hadn't known how far I'd fallen. She knew it was bad, but not that bad. Then she reminded me we were still technically married. We never finalized anything. And then she asked me not to come back to the old life, but to see if we could build something new. Something better. I didn't say yes. But I didn't say no either. I told her I needed time. That I didn't know if this change was permanent or just fueled by guilt. I had spent so long rebuilding myself, I wasn't ready to risk shattering again. She understood. She didn't try to convince me. She just said, "Think about it," and walked away. That night sleep didn't come easily. I stared at the ceiling, wrestling with emotions I thought I'd buried. Part of me ached for her. But another part remembered the pain, the silence, the hurt. I didn't come to a decision that night. I just promised myself I'd think about it more when the sun rose. Sometimes life doesn't offer clean answers. What I've come to understand is that love, no matter how strong, isn't enough on its own. I loved Angelina deeply. I still might. But love without care, without communication, without effort, cannot carry the weight of two broken people. We were both carrying heavy grief, and instead of facing it together, we let it tear us apart. She was grieving and didn't know how to ask for help. I kept quiet and let myself fall apart trying to be strong. That's not strength. That's slow self-destruction. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that unhealed pain becomes venom. You don't notice at first. It creeps into your words, your actions, your silence. And eventually it poisons everything good. Angelina wasn't cruel. She was hurting. And hurt people sometimes hurt the ones they love the most. She had chances to deal with that pain, but she avoided it. I let it continue longer than I should have. That's on me too. I should have stood up for myself, set boundaries, spoken up, instead of matching her pain with silence or escape. And to anyone wondering why I vanished, it wasn't to punish her. It wasn't because I stopped caring. Sometimes leaving is the only way to breathe again. When staying means slowly dying inside, disappearing becomes a lifeline. I needed to remember who I was. I needed peace, even if it meant solitude. But the beauty in all this is, healing is possible. It's not easy. It's messy and it takes honesty. Not just with others but with yourself. You have to face your own damage. Angelina finally did. I've been doing that too in my own quiet way. We're still figuring it out. There's no tidy conclusion here. No grand reconciliation or heartbreak. Just two people trying to pick up the pieces and see if something new can grow from what was broken. So if any part of this sounds like your story, take this with you. Love isn't enough unless you show up fully, emotionally, and honestly. If you're carrying pain, don't ignore it. Don't pretend it doesn't exist. Talk. Heal. And if someone walked away from you, don't assume they did it out of hate. Sometimes it's the only way they knew how to survive. Thank you for listening. You have no idea how much it means.